Welcome to Founding Chronicles. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a historical tale. Quick question: where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Now, let's step back to Louisiana, 1849, and uncover the chilling story of Martha's deadly revenge, the slave who sabotaged her master's wedding cake. Louisiana, in the summer of 1849, was heavy with heat and the smell of the river that cut through the lowlands like a dark vein. Spanish moss draped lazily from the live oaks, their limbs twisting like the hands of old ghosts, and the sun pressed down relentlessly, turning dirt paths into soft, warm clay under bare feet. The air was thick, almost tangible, saturated with the scents of river mud, magnolia blossoms, and the faint sweetness of cane syrup. It was the world Martha had known all her life, a world that demanded obedience, swallowed hope, and punished even the slightest flicker of defiance. Martha was born on a sprawling plantation in the outskirts of New Orleans, where her earliest memories were of the towering mansion on the hill and the long, winding rows of sugar cane that seemed to stretch into infinity. Her mother had been a house servant, her father unknown, rumored to have been another slave or a passing overseer. She learned early the hard rules of her life. She was property, and her purpose was to serve. Yet within that narrow existence, Martha's mind and heart had begun to grow a quiet, smoldering fire, one fueled by small injustices, whispered cruelties, and the endless parade of harsh punishments that came to those who erred, whether by mistake or misfortune. The plantation belonged to a man named Charles Beaumont, a wealthy and haughty figure whose charm in polite society masked a cruelty that only revealed itself within the walls of his estate. His family, small, but tightly bound to him, carried the same airs of superiority. His upcoming wedding to a woman from another prominent Louisiana family was the social event of the year, a display of wealth, influence, and power. Every detail had to be perfect. Guests would arrive by riverboat, carriage, and horseback, their eyes expecting opulence, their ears anticipating the soft hum of laughter and polite conversation. Martha, along with other household slaves, had spent weeks preparing for it. She was tasked with the kitchen, the heart of every grand event on the plantation, the place where the smell of food both nourished and controlled. From sunrise to late into the night, Martha moved with precision, stirring heavy pots of gumbo, rolling dough for delicate pastries, and arranging fruits in baskets like living jewels. The other slaves watched her quietly, noting her skill and the way she seemed almost invisible to the white eyes around her. They whispered in the corners of the kitchen about how she handled knives with uncanny precision, how her hands seemed to anticipate what the chef, an overseer for the kitchen, would demand before he even spoke. But Martha carried more than skill. She carried years of simmering resentment. Every time Charles Beaumont brushed past her with a dismissive nod or a sharp word, it reinforced the stark divide between their worlds, the gulf between freedom and bondage. Even as she worked, she noticed the nervous excitement that permeated the house. The wedding cake, a towering confection adorned with delicate sugar flowers and intricate frosting, had become the centerpiece of Martha's labor. Hours upon hours were spent kneading, folding, and perfecting. She was meticulous, not only because failure meant punishment, but because she was plotting something far more personal. Her mind, once focused solely on survival, had begun weaving, a plan that was as daring as it was dangerous. The idea had come quietly at first, a shadow in the corners of her thoughts, but over months it had taken root and grown into something resolute, undeniable. She would not wait for freedom. She would claim it in the only way she knew she could, through subtle, irrevocable action. The other servants noticed a change in her demeanor, the way her eyes lingered on the cake a little longer than necessary, the quiet tightness of her jaw, but none suspected the depth of her intent. On the day before the wedding, Martha found herself alone in the kitchen, polishing the final decorations, when she discovered the shards. They were jagged pieces of glass, likely discarded from broken bottles in the pantry. The thought came, to her almost immediately, sharp and burning. The wedding cake, the symbol of her master's wealth and social power, could become her instrument. Each piece of glass she mixed carefully into the layers would strike back against the life that had bound her for decades. Her hands shook as she worked, not from fear of discovery, but from the weight of what she was about to do. She had to move, carefully, invisibly, because even the smallest slip would mean death, or worse, a punishment that would haunt her until she too was gone. She measured every fold, every layer, imagining the faces of those who would eat without a second thought, oblivious to the danger hidden within sweetness. The irony was bitter, and she let herself savor it for a moment. The same hands that had served, cleaned, and labored for years were now crafting a tool of vengeance. As the afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, Martha's mind wandered, back to her childhood, to moments of stolen joy in the fields, to her mother's soft lullabies sung late at night under the dim light of lanterns. She remembered the small comforts, the fleeting kindnesses, and the endless fear. Those memories fueled her, reminding her that this act was more than revenge. It was an assertion of power, a defiance of a system that had denied her humanity at every turn. The cake, in all its elegant glory, would carry her message silently, irreversibly. Evening fell, bringing with it the hum of cicadas and the scent of jasmine drifting in from the garden. Martha stayed in the kitchen long after the last candles were lit, inspecting her work, ensuring no trace of suspicion could be found. She moved through the shadows like a wraith, knowing that the next day she would be surrounded by the very people she intended to strike. And yet she felt no fear, only a quiet certainty. The world outside would see only the perfection of her labor, the beauty of the wedding, the laughter and celebration. But beneath it all lay her hidden truth, sharp and unyielding as the shards she had concealed. As the household settled into uneasy slumber, Martha finally allowed herself to rest, her mind racing with possibilities, outcomes, and consequences. She did not know exactly how the morning would unfold, only that the act she had committed was irreversible. The sense of power was intoxicating, a feeling she had never known in all her years of servitude. It was as though, in one quiet, deadly gesture, she had reclaimed something that had always been denied her: agency, voice, and the proof that she could shape her own destiny, even in a world built to suppress it. Morning arrived with a golden haze over the plantation, and with it, the wedding. The guests began to gather, dressed in their finest, their faces bright with anticipation. Martha moved among them silently, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, attending to demands with practiced ease, her expression calm, controlled. No one could guess the storm hidden beneath her composed exterior. Every step she took, every careful placement of a pastry or a cup of tea, was a silent note in the symphony of vengeance she had orchestrated. The cake, now the centerpiece of the great hall, gleamed under the chandelier, untouched and pristine. Martha lingered near it, observing the first curious glances from the bride and groom, the approving nods from family and friends. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the anticipation of justice, justice that, in her mind, was long overdue. And as the first slices were cut, her breath caught. The moment had come. Her carefully hidden shards, her quiet rebellion, were about to enter the world, invisible yet irreversible, leaving consequences that would ripple far beyond the walls of the plantation. The morning sun had barely settled into the sky when the guests began to arrive, their carriages crunching over the gravel drive, horses stamping and snorting in impatience. The air was alive with laughter, greetings, and the polite chatter of families who had traveled miles to witness the union of Charles Beaumont and his bride, Lillian Duval, a woman whose own lineage carried whispers of wealth and influence. The grand hall shimmered with the glow of polished wooden floors, sparkling crystal chandeliers, and carefully arranged bouquets that filled the space with the faint sweetness of garden blooms. To the eyes of the visitors, everything radiated. Perfection, the seamless blending of privilege, taste, and careful planning. Martha moved through this tableau of celebration with quiet efficiency, her hands steady as she placed delicate hors d'oeuvres on silver trays and refilled crystal goblets with the cool, sparkling punch. She had rehearsed these movements countless times, yet today each step carried the weight of her secret. The shards she had hidden in the wedding cake remained undetectable beneath the layers of sugar and frosting, invisible to the eyes of those who had always seen her as nothing more than a shadow in the corner. Her calm exterior belied the fire simmering inside her, a fire that had been years in the making, fueled by indignities, whispered cruelties, and the endless reminders of a life confined within invisible chains. The ceremony itself was brief, elegant, and punctuated by smiles and polite applause. Guests commented on the bride's gown, the groom's composure, and the beauty of the setting. But none noticed the tension that hovered in the kitchen, nor the silent calculations of the woman who had labored tirelessly to craft the centerpiece of the reception. Martha's presence went largely unnoticed by those whose lives mattered most in that moment. She was an invisible force, her identity defined by the service she provided, yet she carried within her the power to reshape the very fabric of this gathering. As the couple exited to cheers, the guests followed into the dining hall. The long tables were adorned with polished silverware, crystal glasses, and linens so white they seemed to glow in the morning light. Martha lingered near the cake table, ostensibly arranging floral accents, but in truth, watching every face that approached the towering confection. She observed the joy, the anticipation, the self-satisfied smiles of those who believed themselves untouchable. It was a strange sensation, knowing that in mere moments, the very hands they extended in celebration would be brushing against something that carried a quiet, deadly truth. The first slice of cake was cut by the bride and groom, their hands trembling slightly with excitement, their eyes alight with the promise of new beginnings. Lillian laughed softly, the sound like chimes in the warm, fragrant air, unaware of the danger she was about to encounter. Charles, proud and commanding, offered a confident smile, oblivious to the silent reckoning hovering within his household. Martha's pulse quickened, but not with fear. This was anticipation, the sort of sharp, thrilling awareness that comes when one's plan is on the verge of fruition. She watched the knife slice through the layers, sugar giving way to cake, frosting spilling like delicate snow. Hidden beneath, the jagged fragments of glass waited, silent and unyielding, ready to carry her message into the world. The first bite was taken, and Martha's breath caught in her throat. She saw Lillian's eyes widen slightly, a brief flash of discomfort, quickly masked by politeness and the societal expectation to enjoy one's wedding cake. The guests laughed, oblivious to the invisible danger hidden in the sweetness. A few moments later, Charles raised his fork, cutting another slice for himself. Martha's gaze followed him, noting the way the sunlight caught the sharp edges of the hidden shards, glinting ever so slightly beneath the frosting. The power she felt was intoxicating, an affirmation that even in a world designed to suppress her, she could wield influence in the most direct and irrevocable way imaginable. Yet as the minutes stretched into hours, Martha realized the complexity of what she had done. She had not accounted for every variable, every subtle shift in circumstance. The cake was being served to more than just the couple. Guests, friends, and family now partook in the same slices, unknowingly carrying the consequences of her actions. Her mind raced with questions. Would the shards injure them? How far would the harm extend? Could she bear the weight of lives changed forever because of the slow, deliberate act she had carried out? The fire of her revenge was no longer a simple blaze. It had become a storm, unpredictable and consuming, and she was at the center of it, powerless to control its reach. Despite these anxieties, she moved with precision, attending to guests, answering questions with practiced courtesy, ensuring that no one suspected the quiet storm she had unleashed. She overheard conversations about the bride's beauty, the groom's social connections, and the splendor of the mansion. Everyone spoke as if the world were perfect, unaware of the invisible fracture she had inserted into their reality. In that moment, Martha understood a truth she had known intellectually but never felt so viscerally. Power is not only in the grand gestures, but also in the subtle, unseen acts, the ones that shift the balance quietly yet irrevocably. The first incident came unexpectedly. A young man, a cousin of the bride, winced as he took a bite. His hand froze midair, and a small gasp escaped his lips. Martha's heart tightened, not from fear of exposure, but from the realization that her act had begun to manifest in the world. Others around him looked on, confused, uncertain whether it was a simple lapse in appetite or something more sinister. Martha stepped forward instinctively, offering assistance, masking the intensity of her gaze behind a calm, practiced smile. She was both spectator and participant in her own design, caught in the duality of invisible power and overt service. The room, once filled with light laughter, began to carry a tension, subtle yet undeniable. Guests murmured, some excusing themselves from the table, others clutching throats or lips in discomfort. Martha moved among them, offering water and reassurance, her mind calculating the cascade of events in real time. The elegance of the morning was fracturing, revealing the undercurrent of consequence that always lurked beneath the surface of polite society. In those moments, Martha felt both the triumph and the burden of her actions. She had claimed her agency, had exercised a form of power she had never been permitted to possess, yet she could not escape the knowledge that she had changed lives irrevocably. Amidst this unfolding chaos, she caught sight of Charles Beaumont, his face twisting between confusion and disbelief. The man who had wielded control over her entire life, who had regarded her as nothing more than property, now appeared vulnerable, uncertain. Martha's pulse quickened, not in malice, but in the stark, undeniable affirmation that the balance had shifted. For decades, he had dictated the terms of her existence. Now, for the first time, she held a measure of control over him and the world he had so arrogantly believed he mastered. And yet, Martha's awareness was sharp, tinged with the sobering realization that her actions were irreversible. The shards she had hidden, the deliberate act of defiance, were beyond recall. The consequences would extend beyond the ballroom, the mansion, and the riverbanks that cradled the plantation. There would be injury, there would be outrage, and there would be the inevitable reckoning. Martha knew she could not undo what she had done. All she could do was bear witness to it, remain composed, and navigate the treacherous waters she had stirred into motion. As the afternoon wore on, the air thick with tension, the invisible truth Martha carried began to manifest more fully. Whispers circulated, glances darted between guests, and the first signs of pain appeared. Some clutched mouths, others doubled over slightly, unsure how to respond. The veneer of celebration cracked, revealing the raw human reality beneath the social performance. Martha, in the center of this quiet storm, felt the full weight of her agency. She had enacted her revenge, yet in doing so, she had become entwined with the consequences in ways she had not fully anticipated. The wedding, once a symbol of joy and social triumph, had become a stage for her assertion of humanity, of defiance, and of the quiet, undeniable truth that even the oppressed could, in certain moments, assert their power in ways the world could neither see nor control. The sun had climbed high into the Louisiana sky, turning the plantation grounds into a furnace of light and heat. Shadows from the tall oaks offered little respite, and the air hung thick with the mingling scents of sweat, magnolia, and the lingering aroma of sugar and baked goods. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere had changed. Laughter that had once rang clear and bright now carried an undertone of unease, punctuated by coughs, stifled cries, and murmured complaints. Guests who had arrived in finery and anticipation were now contorted in discomfort, their polished gloves clutched nervously to their mouths, their smiles strained and faltering. Martha moved among them, her hands steady as ever, her face composed in the serene mask of servitude. Inside, her heart pounded with a mixture of satisfaction, fear, and a peculiar, heavy sorrow. What she had set into motion was real now, tangible in the grimaces, the pale faces, the small, sharp cries that pierced the hum of polite conversation. Each reaction was confirmation of her agency, a testament that, for once, she was not invisible, that her voice, however silent, had echoed through the very air of the plantation. Yet with each confirmation came the sobering truth. She could not undo the pain she had caused. There was no turning back, no erasing the shards she had hidden, no whisper that could undo the reality that had been unleashed. Charles Beaumont's face had shifted from pride to confusion to mounting alarm. He moved through the room with stiff, jerky steps, attempting to maintain composure, to offer reassurance that somehow everything was fine. But his eyes betrayed him, darting from guest to guest, seeking understanding, seeking control, seeking the invisible hand that had turned his day into chaos. He stopped beside Lillian, who clutched her stomach, her carefully arranged gown bunched awkwardly in her hands, and spoke words that sounded rehearsed even to his own ears. Martha caught the tremor in his voice, a subtle fracture that no amount of wealth, pride, or authority could repair. Guests now whispered openly, faces pale, movements slowed, hands pressed to lips or chests. A child, barely old enough to understand, tugged at his mother's dress, whimpering softly. The women glanced at one another, eyes wide with disbelief and growing panic, while the men exchanged urgent, confused glances. No one could understand the sudden wave of discomfort. The cause remained hidden, invisible, yet it pulsed through the gathering with a force that could not be ignored. Martha observed quietly, feeling the weight of every gasp, every grimace, every trembling hand. Her actions had transformed the room, the celebration, into a landscape of tension and uncertainty. She paused near the cake, pretending to adjust a tray of fruit, and allowed herself a brief moment to consider what she had done. The shards of glass, hidden beneath layers of sweetness, were more than just instruments of vengeance. They were symbols, silent and cutting, of every indignity she had endured. Every harsh word, every dismissal, every lash she had endured or witnessed in her years as a slave coalesced in this act. She had long been taught obedience, had long been told her life was of no consequence, that her labor, her sweat, her pain were mere tools to elevate others. And now, in a quiet, deliberate gesture, she had claimed a measure of justice, carved not in words but in action, subtle yet irrevocable. The first true signs of injury began to manifest more clearly. A man, attempting to conceal the sharp pain, twisting through his mouth, stumbled back from the table, clutching his throat. Another, older and less composed, gagged and staggered toward the nearest servant, eyes wide in shock. The room erupted in murmurs, then frantic cries, as the reality of harm began to pierce through the veneer of civility. Guests who had only Moments before admired the perfection of the decorations now found themselves facing vulnerability, a reminder that the world they controlled with money and lineage was not as unassailable as they believed. Amidst the chaos, Martha's mind remained, alert, calculating. She moved as if nothing were amiss, guiding those who faltered, offering water or a reassuring word with a voice as smooth as honey, masking the fire that roared quietly within her. She understood with sharp clarity the duality of her position. She was both agent and observer, perpetrator and servant, witness to a storm she had created yet unable to fully control. Every reaction in the room fed into her awareness, reminding her of the profound power of invisible acts, the quiet authority of someone whose existence had been systematically minimized. Yet, even as she navigated the unfolding disaster, a part of Martha felt a hollow emptiness, an awareness that no act of revenge could ever truly repair the damage done to her own soul by decades of subjugation. She had struck at her oppressors, had claimed a measure of justice in a world that denied it, but the act came at a cost. She could not escape the knowledge that her revenge, while cathartic, was also irreversible, that in asserting her power, she had become enmeshed in consequences she could neither fully predict nor control. The weight of this duality pressed upon her chest, even as she moved gracefully among the faltering guests, a silent observer of the pain she had set into motion. The bride and groom, central figures in the unfolding crisis, were now visibly distressed. Lillian clutched the arm of a maid, her face pale, eyes wide, trembling with both shock and fear. Charles, desperate to maintain order and dignity, barked instructions, gesturing to his guests, demanding calm, yet his voice lacked authority, the carefully constructed mask of control slipping with every passing moment. Martha watched, noting the subtle cracks in his posture, the way his eyes flicked toward her only briefly, a faint suspicion that did not yet take shape into accusation. The irony was not lost on her. The man who had dictated every aspect of her life was now powerless, struggling against forces he could neither see nor comprehend. Outside the windows, the Louisiana heat shimmered across the grounds, the river, reflecting a stark blue sky that contrasted sharply with the turmoil inside. The gardens, once a source of pride and aesthetic pleasure, seemed distant, irrelevant, as the human drama inside consumed the space. Martha felt herself both anchored and adrift, connected to the unfolding reality by the knowledge of her own agency, yet detached in the sense that no one could truly see her role, could understand the depths of thought and emotion that had driven her to this point. She was invisible in plain sight, a shadow wielding profound influence over the lives of those who had believed themselves untouchable. The situation escalated further as more guests began to falter, some retreating from the table, others collapsing quietly into the arms of attendants. Screams began to echo through the halls, a discordant chorus that replaced the earlier laughter. Martha's heart ached not from regret, but from the enormity of what she had done. Her actions had broken the carefully constructed illusion of control, revealing the fragility beneath the gilded surface of wealth and social expectation. In that moment, she felt both the thrill of empowerment and the crushing weight of responsibility, a duality that would haunt her as long as she lived. The household staff, long accustomed to silence and compliance, moved quickly to assist, their eyes darting toward Martha, seeking direction. She offered it with precision, guiding them calmly, her voice a steady anchor amidst the storm. Yet even as she performed these duties, she was aware of the quiet acknowledgement of her power, the recognition that while she had always been unseen, her actions now carried tangible impact. She was no longer simply a servant, she was an agent of consequence, a reminder that even in systems designed to suppress, individuals could exert influence, alter events, and claim a measure of justice, however subtle or dangerous. By late afternoon, the chaos had reached its peak. Guests who had been overcome by sudden pain or shock were tended to, some escorted to quieter spaces, others left in liminal states of confusion and alarm. The wedding, once a symbol of social perfection and celebration, had transformed into a scene of disarray and human vulnerability. Martha, standing at the heart of the maelstrom, felt the full measure of her journey. From invisible servant to active participant in the reordering of power, from silent observer to orchestrator of consequences that no one could ignore. The shards she had hidden, the quiet defiance she had executed had altered lives irrevocably, a stark testament to the complex interplay of oppression, vengeance, and human resilience. As the sun began its slow descent over the Louisiana horizon, the plantation was transformed. What had been a setting for joy and celebration now resembled a house caught in the throes of chaos. Servants rushed through corridors, attending to the afflicted, bringing cool water, damp cloths, and whispered reassurances. The once pristine dining hall, with its polished floors and glimmering chandeliers, was now scattered with overturned chairs, half-eaten plates, and the remnants of a celebration that had fractured under the weight of invisible but deadly forces. Martha stood quietly near the cake table, her hands folded, her face composed, though inside a storm of emotion churned. She had achieved what she set out to do, yet the reality of the aftermath weighed heavily on her heart. Charles Beaumont, the man who had governed her entire life, now staggered between anger, fear, and disbelief. His eyes, once cold and commanding, searched the room for understanding, for explanation, for someone to restore the control he had always wielded so effortlessly. But the answers were beyond him, beyond the reach of his money, his influence, and even his pride. His guests, some recovering, some still pale and trembling, murmured among themselves, casting glances that combined suspicion, fear, and indignation. The veneer of elegance, the illusion of order, had been shattered, leaving only raw human vulnerability. Martha's gaze fell on the wedding cake, now sliced and partially consumed, the instrument of her revenge no longer a silent object, but a catalyst for chaos and consequence. She felt no joy in the suffering it had caused, only a deep, heavy acknowledgement of the power she had exercised, and the irrevocable nature of her choice. For years she had been taught obedience, invisibility, and compliance. Her life had been one of endless labor, small indignities, and constant reminders of her place in the world. And now, for the first time, she had claimed agency. But the victory was bittersweet. It came not with celebration or relief, but with the weight of lives altered, trust broken, and the undeniable knowledge that her actions would reverberate far beyond the walls of the plantation. Some guests began to recover, aided by the attentive household staff, while others were escorted from the hall, still shaken and uncertain of what had transpired. Whispers filled the air, questions posed in hushed tones. Was it an accident? Poison? A prank gone horribly wrong? No one suspected Martha, not yet. Her quiet composure, her seamless execution of duties shielded her from scrutiny. She moved among the recovering guests, offering water, guiding hands, and masking every flicker of emotion, her outward demeanor betraying none of the storm within. She had learned to be invisible, and now that skill protected her, even as the consequences of her act were undeniable. Lillian Duval, the bride, sat pale and trembling in the arms of a maid, her exquisite gown rumpled, her carefully arranged hair slightly askew. Her eyes darted anxiously around the room, seeking reassurance, explanation, or someone to blame. Charles approached her, his own composure fractured, speaking in clipped tones that attempted to restore dignity, though the effort rang hollow. Martha observed them both, noting the shift in their posture, the tremor in their voices, the subtle cracks in the armor of control they had long wielded so effortlessly. She felt a complex mixture of satisfaction, sorrow, and exhaustion, Aware that the act of revenge she had executed had shifted more than the immediate moment, it had disrupted the balance of power that had governed her life for decades. As evening fell, the chaos gradually subsided into a tense quiet. Guests were escorted from the mansion, some supported by staff, some assisted to carriages, each carrying the memory of sudden vulnerability, of elegance interrupted by consequence. The plantation, once a symbol of wealth, control, and social superiority, stood bathed in the orange glow of sunset, silent in its transformation. Martha remained in the kitchen, cleaning as she always had, but her movements were no longer merely mechanical. Every gesture, every measured step carried the weight of her experience, the knowledge of the power she had wielded, and the realization that her life, and the lives around her, would never be the same. That night, as the household settled uneasily, Martha found a quiet moment alone. She sat by the small window of the kitchen, looking out at the darkening fields, the Mississippi, river glinting faintly in the last rays of sunlight. Memories of her childhood, of years of labor and suppression, of small kindnesses and endless cruelties washed over her. She allowed herself to feel, fully and without restraint, the full complexity of her experience: anger, grief, fear, empowerment, sorrow. For the first time in decades, she acknowledged the breadth of her own agency and the depth of the consequences that agency carried. She had acted not in thoughtless malice, but in quiet defiance, in a deliberate reclaiming of power that had long been denied to her. The days that followed were marked by investigation and rumor. Guests whispered of the strange events, families exchanged theories, and the plantation became a locus of uneasy curiosity and scandal. Martha continued her duties, outwardly unchanged, yet the subtle shift in her own perception was profound. She knew the truth. She had exercised power, struck against a system designed to deny her, and claimed a measure of justice, however fraught and incomplete. She moved among the household staff with quiet awareness, understanding that her life had irrevocably shifted. She was no longer only a servant. She was a witness, an actor, and a reminder that even in the harshest oppression, agency could be claimed, consequences could be imposed, and voices could be felt, even when unheard. History often forgets the small, invisible acts that shape the lives of the powerful and the oppressed alike. Martha's story, preserved only in fragments, whispers through time as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the complexity of moral choice, and the enduring struggle for dignity in a world structured to deny it. In the quiet of the plantation kitchen, with shadows stretching long across the floor, Martha understood something profound: that power does not always lie in wealth or social standing, but in the deliberate choices of those who are unseen, unheard, and underestimated. Her revenge was complete, yet it was also a beginning. In the broken elegance of the wedding, in the altered lives of guests and masters alike, Martha had left a mark, a reminder that even the most oppressed could, in moments of courage and calculation, assert their humanity in ways that could never be erased. And as the river flowed silently past the plantation, reflecting the fading light of day, she felt a quiet resolve settle within her. She had acted, she had claimed agency, and though the world around her remained harsh and unyielding, she had proven, indelibly, that even the smallest hand could shape events in ways that echoed far beyond its own measure. Martha's story is one of pain, resilience, and quiet defiance, a story of a life constrained by injustice, yet illuminated by moments of courage and determination. The shards hidden within the wedding cake were not merely fragments of glass. They were fragments of a life denied, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to assert itself in the face of impossible odds. In the hush of the Louisiana evening, The plantation stood as a witness to the irreversible consequences of one woman's choice and the quiet power that can arise from even the most invisible lives.